And this is Navonod with another exciting episode of Drunk It Up. Now here I am with a poker student of mine. We were just going through some hand histories, and it made me kind of come to this decision. And yeah, I've had a little bit to drink. That I should share this arsenal with everyone out there. This is the guide that I give any poker student, anyone that I take on and start kind of coaching. I give them this, and when I go through their hand histories, or if I go through, like tonight I did actually a sweat session, or if I go through like recorded sessions, pretty much every time I find mistakes and I find things that are leaking off money, it falls into one of these 18 things, these 18 poker edicts. I've kind of put these together, and I think it's really, really valuable. And I think honestly that if you get good at these things, there's not that much more to get good at. Um, there are, a lot of things about poker, and you can really break them down and define them and quantify them and to just a relatively small number of things. But I think these 18 are pretty much the primary 18 things. And if you have any questions about them, post them in the comment section, or send me an email, dondoust@gmail.com. Just kind of let me know. And in fact, if you'd like to see a video on that subject, if you don't know enough about it, I'd be happy to do it. But probably if you're leaking money somewhere, it's coming from one of these places. This is like the again 18 poker edicts that I give to my students, anyone I'm coaching, anyone I'm helping out. Number one, don't do anything stupid, and as soon as you do something stupid, your session is over. And what I mean by that, and it might sound funny, but I'm absolutely serious. Like when you do something that as you're doing it you know is wrong, you're over. Your session's done. You're either on tilt, or you're about to be, or you're just not playing well. You need to take a break, take a walk, and don't do anything like willingly stupid. Always think in ranges. Number two, keep in mind that you and your opponent, you and villain or villains, don't have hands per se unless there's a showdown. It's not very relevant what you're holding if you 3-bet preflop and your opponent folds. You don't get extra money for having the best hand in a spot like that. So really just always be playing one range against another range. Play your perceived range against your opponent's perceived range, what you expect your opponent's range to be. And just think in those terms and play in those terms, and play as though it is an absolute scientific fact that your range and your opponent's range, your ranges start out very blurry and fuzzy and not defined, and they don't really become like tangible hands unless there's a showdown. They just keep getting closer and closer to becoming actual hands. Number three, have a reason when you make a bet. Make sure that your reason is logically consistent. Why did you bet here? I asked a couple times tonight, and on more than one occasion I got the answer, well, I was pretty sure I had the best hand. That I have the best hand is not a reason to bet. I have the best hand does not equal I should bet. There's a school of thought, well, I mean, not even a school of thought, a lot of people are starting to think in terms of just value betting and bluffing. And that is not strictly and only the case. Then there's other people that are thinking that it makes some kind of sense to sort of bet for protection some of the time. So should you bet because you want to price out draws, or you put your opponent on this hand and you want to allow him to make a mathematical mistake? Do you want to bet only when you can get called by worse hands and get better hands to fold right here, right now on this bet? And I would say really no. Really the answer, I think I've kind of cracked this code. I've thought a lot about it, and what I think it comes down to is sometimes you can make a bet and you're pretty sure that you're not going to get called by anything worse. You're pretty sure that nothing better is going to fold, but you also know that it is a correct thing to do to just bet. And you're not betting to protect your hand. You're not betting to price out draws. You're simply betting. Anytime you make a bet, you're simply betting in the hopes that your opponent puts more money into a pot that you are a favorite to win, either at or before showdown. The other reason is to get your opponent to relinquish their equity share. So it can make complete sense to, like, 3-bet some kind of like ace, say 3-bet ace 2 suited, maybe like cutoff versus button. Cutoff opens, you 3-bet ace deuce suited, and you flop the two. He calls, the flop comes out like 2, 7, 9 rainbow. Villain checks, and you're thinking about making a c-bet here, but you're thinking, well, is he ever going to call me with anything worse than a pair of twos? Is he ever going to fold anything better than a pair of twos? Probably not, probably not right here, right now on this one street. But we need to think also about future streets, and we also need to think about not making mistakes ourselves. And very often it is preferable that your villain surrender their share of the pot as to like check back a pair of twos and then face a turn lead. So really the reasons that you're going to bet, you might bet your ace high. If you're playing heads up, sometimes you'll check back your ace highs because you've got decent showdown value, like on dry boards. But sometimes it also makes sense to bet your ace highs. And one of the times it can make sense is if you have like 3 to straight, and like say 3 to the wheel and 3 to the nut flush with the overcard. Oftentimes you're betting on that flop, not expecting to get a lot of immediate folds from better hands, and not expecting to get called by a lot of second best hands, but you're betting because you are trying or hoping that your opponent will release their equity either now or later on in the hand. Also, if you're value betting, what your value bet can be looked at as just simply trying to get more money into a pot that you're a favorite to win. So there's a lot of times when you can be value betting on the flop or bluffing on the flop, but it's really sort of a value bet when you're bluffing on the flop if you are a favorite to take down that pot before or at showdown. So really just simplify it and just take it to its root. You're betting for 2 reasons. Number 1, you're betting hoping that your opponent will relinquish their equity share, or sometimes you can be doing both, or you're betting hoping to get your opponent to put more money into a pot that you will most likely win. Number 4, have a plan. Not just in this game, not just at this table, at this night against this opponent, but really have a plan for every street, and have a plan at least when you get to the flop. Frame your hand out and think about your relative hand value, your opponent's mistake propensities. Have good default lines, and then have a plan for different turn cards. Have a plan for different rivers. Know what you're trying to accomplish, and think a few steps ahead. Really just a lot of the things I saw tonight was just like, well, I mean, you put this bet in here as a call. You called here. What were you thinking was going to happen on the end? The guy, like say, check raised the flop and then bet the turn. And, if your hand is good enough to call there, if you went directly to showdown, but you're not going to put any more money in the pot ever, and you know that your opponent's going to continue, hypothetically, if you know your opponent's going to continue bluffing with all of his air, his semi-bluffs are either going to get there and he's going to value bet, or they're not and he's going to bluff. Or he's got some kind of actual value hand that you can't beat. And no matter how you slice it, you're not going to be able to get another bet in. Or you're not going to be able to put another bet in on the river. So if you can't ever call a river bet, and you think there's a really good chance your opponent's going to bet the river, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to call on the turn. So, be thinking about these things. Think about what you're going to do on the turn, depending on how the action goes on the flop. Think if you can think more steps ahead than your opponents can, you're well on your way to playing profitable poker. Size your bets appropriately. I saw this mistake more than any mistake tonight. When I say size your bets appropriately, I mean really 3 things. Number 1, just goes back to basic bet theory. Basic bet theory is this: the bigger my bet sizing is, the more hands will fold, the stronger my opponent's continuing range is going to be. That's the whole deal, for better or for worse, depending on what that means to you and means during this exact hand, whatever hypothetical hand. But also, playing exploitatively, size your bets based on your opponent's range. If you think that, let's say that you get to this river spot where you were kind of on a coordinated board, most of the draws missed, including the draw that you've been semi-bluffing with on the flop and the turn. And you get to the river, and you don't have any showdown value. You have something like, I don't know, 8 high or 7 high. But it looks like your opponent could have gotten to this river with a good number of busted draws himself. Maybe you can bet like half the pot or a little less than half the pot, because you know that your opponent's made hands, his strong hands, after seeing all the draws miss, are really not going to fold almost regardless of what you bet. And you know that your opponents are not going to call with busted flush draws. So think about the type of hand you have, and are you hoping to get called by worse hands, or are you hoping to get better hands to fold? And choose the bet size that is most appropriate for that. So if you think that the bulk of your opponent's range is very strong, very, very powerful, and you have the nuts, bet big. If you have a value hand but it looks like your opponent's range is fairly weak, you might want to bet small, just hoping to get that call. So bet against the range that you're trying to either get value from or that you're trying to fold out. And I think that also you need to think about stack to pot ratio, and if you're unfamiliar with this concept, do some homework, do some research on it. SPRs, this stack to pot ratio and the pot geometric growth of bet sizing as you move through a hand are immensely important. We'll talk about them in another video, I'm sure, at some point. Number 6, always be profiling. Constantly, whether you're at the actual felt or the cyber felt, always be thinking in population tendencies, metagame trends, and then whatever history, stats, reads, if you're playing live, that you might have on your opponent. Try to put all that together and come up with some kind of a meaningful sort of tag for him. If he's a tag, then his tag is tag. But what I mean to do is really start profiling your opponents and categorize them. Start with broad stereotypes and then try to really get more and more defined as more information presents itself. You're going to need this information for number 7, which is create and understand how to create good default lines, utilize those lines, and really learn how to get in the habit of framing your hand out based on your relative hand value and whatever you know about your opponent, his style, and his ranges, and how he's going to react to certain things. So your opponent's mistake propensity and your relative hand value, really that is what is going to keep you winning money and making good decisions after the flop, is thinking along those lines. This is okay, maybe I got a little bit carried away with this, but maybe pause this, read this, and don't be too quick to dismiss it because it's a little funny. I mean, this is serious stuff. This is really, really important, and it's something I came up with myself, and I'm not going to say that no one else is doing it. I don't even know, it could be in print somewhere, I haven't seen it. But this is sort of my formula for estimating your implied odds, and I think it's something that works pretty well, and you can do it, in game. You can kind of do it on the fly. Really pause it and read it. Just as an example, and this is not going to be the example from the bottom of the page, I'm just going to give you an example. If you are on the turn and you've got a nut flush draw with an overcard, and your opponent bets 100 chips into a 100 chip pot, you have to know by figuring your equity and comparing that to the pot odds, you have to know that you're not getting the right pot odds to make that call. Even if there's 100 chips in the pot and your opponent bets 50 chips, let's say you have a naked flush draw, you're still not getting the right price on the turn to take one off. You're just not quite. I mean, it's close, but you're not quite getting the right money to do that. So why do we still sometimes do that? Well, there's a number of reasons. Sometimes we're going to call and peel, and then our opponent's just going to check fold the next street. So that happens. Sometimes we're going to find a good card to bluff, and our opponent's going to bet we're going to raise with nothing. There's good things that can happen outside of implied odds, but really, getting in the habit of thinking of things like this. Okay, so example. You have the nut flush draw with one overcard, the ace, and your opponent makes a pot size bet. He bets 100 chips into a 100 chip pot. If you make the call, then there will be 300 chips in the pot. At that point, if you make your hand on the next card, is your opponent going to bet again? Is he going to check and call? And let's just assume for the sake of argument that we think that our opponent's most likely to check and call because he's a little bit timid about flushes. If he watches me call his bet on the flop, call his bet on the turn, and then the third heart comes in, he may not be very inclined to pay off there. But it depends on the opponent, and it depends on stack sizes and a bunch of other factors. But the primary thing here is how we get our reverse implied odds number. Okay, so here we go again. We make the $100 call. If we make the $100 call, there's 300 in the pot, and you hit your flush. Your opponent checks. What are you going to bet? This goes back to planning ahead and thinking ahead, but know and have a plan. Understand what amount of money you're going to bet, and then try to figure out what percent of your opponent's range is going to be able to call that bet. If you think that about half of your opponent's hands, just kind of as an example, if you think half of your opponent's hands are going to be strong enough, or they're still going to have enough showdown value that they're going to feel compelled to call if you make a pot-sized river bet, then plan on making that pot-sized river bet and figure that it's going to get called half the time. So you're going to make a $300 bet. It's going to get called 50% of the time. So there's $150 in value there. So you can take that $150 and you can add that directly into the pot when you're deciding whether you have the right pot odds or really implied odds to play or you don't. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I can go through that again at some point. Again, if any of this doesn't make sense and you want to know about it, drop me a line. Look me up on 2+2. I'm Donovan, or post something here. I'm definitely willing to help out in whatever way I can. So 10 is Beluga theorem. It's something that I stole off a guy who goes by Beluga Whale. Maybe you've heard of him. He's a big 2+2. He's got a lot of great stuff on 3 bets and whatnot. But this Beluga theorem is so important, and it's so true, and it's such a just obvious but not obvious fact. It's not. It doesn't seem obvious when you're in the moment, but if you actually think about it, what do we know about low stakes players? What do we know about live players? What do we know about micro stakes players? We know for sure that they call too frequently and they don't raise often enough for value or as a bluff. So how do we exploit that? And the answer is that we bet thinner, but we play tighter against raises. So the other thing is that I think that almost all players are just really incredibly imbalanced on their turn check raises. Turn check raises are almost never bluffs. Only really good players that know that they're playing against other really good players tend to do a lot of this turn check raising. You'll see it on occasion playing heads up, but in general, a turn check raise is not a bluff. And in particular, a turn check raise at the micros is not a bluff. So if you find yourself in a spot where even though your hand is pretty decent, it doesn't beat your opponent's legitimate value betting hands, so you've effectively got a bluff catcher. Understand that, but also then understand that players at the lower stakes simply do not make that bluff raise. So the Beluga theorem is don't call raises on the turn with a single pair. Now, of course, you could have other equity like pair plus gut shot with a flush draw. Is that a possible thing? Anyway, you can have enough equity to make it make sense to call the raise, but not just with a single pair. Depending on the bet sizing. But as a pretty good rule of thumb, if you have even a hand like pocket aces on 7-4-2 king, just bet the flop, bet the turn, and bet the river. If you get raised at any point, you ought to probably be done. Maybe depending on the exact run out, you can call a raise on the flop with your overpair. But then if you get, let's say your opponent check calls a flop, and then he checks to you on the turn, you've got your aces, you bet them for value, and he raises you, you're dead, man. Just give it up. So that's, yeah, Beluga theorem is money. It's gold. 11 at the micros, small stakes, and I kind of already covered this. Bet thin for value and be very tight against raises. Get used to taking bet full blinds for value. Like make thin value bets and fold to raises. Number 12. Okay, at the micros, do we need to float? Yeah, I think it's okay to float at the micros because I think that almost every player at the micros and really even more players at just small stakes c-bet way too frequently and don't double barrel the turn anywhere near often enough. They're just sort of a lot of bet one time on the flop and then give up. There's a ton of that going on, and we ought to be exploiting that. And the way to do that, one of the ways to do that, is by floating with the right hands against the right opponents in the right situations. You want to be in position. You want to be playing against an opponent who is going to c-bet a ton, but then just give up on turns if they don't have a real hand. You want to do this when you have equity, and this goes back to just one of my prime directives here. If you're sometimes going to take an action and sometimes not take an action, why not take that action when you have equity rather than take it the times when you don't have equity? I really think the example that I list here with the Queen Jack of Spades on 10 of Spades, 4 of Diamonds, 2 of Clubs, I think that says it all. I think that's really a great example. If you have a hand like Queen Jack suited in Spades and you call from the button against a cutoff open and the flop comes out 10-4-2 rainbow, your opponent's probably going to c-bet that flop nearly 100% of the time. He might c-bet that honestly, literally more than 90% or in the 90% ballpark anyway. That's too much. And if he's not double barreling enough, then you need to be floating. So get in there and float when you have positions so that your opponent can c-bet the flop. You can call, they can check the turn, you can bet and win the pot. And do it when you have equity, like 2 overcards with 3 to a straight and 3 to a good flush, like 3 to a royal flush, actually, here in this example, would be a perfect spot to float in. Your opponent bets, you call, and then on the turn, maybe you improve, and if your opponent bets again, if you improve to like a flush draw with overcards, then you can call again a lot of the time. Maybe if you hit specifically the King of Spades, you could even consider raising and using it as like a similar bluff if they bet again. And very often they're not going to. They're just going to check and give up. Or sometimes you'll have like, you'll pick up some kind of equity. Your opponent will check and then call your bet. And so that's just another example when it's a lot better to have equity than to not have equity. 13, polarize your aggressive ranges. I saw a lot of this in the hand history review, or the session I did tonight. Like accidentally range merging. Range merging is okay, and having like more linear 3-bet ranges against players that are expecting you to be polarized certainly has its place and time. But in a very general sense, I mean, really, your aggressive ranges have got to be polarized to some degree, and I would suggest polarizing your ranges about as much as your opponents will let you get away with. When they force you to change gears, then change gears. But if they're going to let you just like c-bet like second pair with a good kicker or better, and c-bet your air and check everything else back, and they're not going to exploit you by like bombing the turn with huge overbets or check raising the turn and jamming rivers every time you check the flop back, then keep polarized. Polarized is good. If there's 2 players and one's playing a polarized range and the other's playing a bluff catcher range, even if they both have the same equity, the guy that's got the polarized range is at such a huge advantage. And it doesn't even matter. If your range is polarized, position doesn't even come into play. So another nice thing is when you have either a really good hand or like a draw, polarizing your range out of position eliminates your opponent's positional advantage. I mean, pretty much completely, which is something we'll talk about in a later video. remind me. 14, stay disciplined at all times. Remember reciprocity, the idea that in order to get ahead in life, you have to be willing and or able to do something that other people are not willing and or able to do. That's how you get ahead. That's the principle of reciprocity, or I've heard it referred to as the principle of reciprocality, but I don't think that's I don't think that's the right way to say it. Anything you can do better than your opponents can do is an edge that you have on them. Work on staying disciplined. Really stay focused, pay attention, and make sure that you're following all 18 of these edicts at all times. Stay in it, stay in the game. Discipline is huge. 15, utilize game selection. You know, people often talk about whether or not you decide to enter a pot in the first place is the most fundamental and biggest decision you're going to make. But really, it's not quite the truth. The truth is, the more decisions that come off of any single decision, the more important and fundamental that decision tends to be. All of your decisions are going to flow from whether or not you're playing. And table selection is so massively important. Just think about it like this. If you are really bad at poker, you could be like terrible at poker. But if you can find like 8 guys that are worse than you are, and you can get them to play reasonably high stakes with you, you could quit your job and become a professional poker player even though you're bad at poker. It's about playing against the right types of players. It's about playing against bad decision makers who are just not positionally aware. And it's also about having the tight players on your left and the loose and aggressive players on your right hand side. So really utilize good table selection. Don't just jump into every game you can possibly get into and just hate life and sweat it out while you're getting beat up. Table change. Put in for a table change if you're at the casino. If you're at a home game, say something like metaphysical and supernatural that, you know, I'll give you $1 to trade me chairs. This one has bad mojo. Whatever you have to do, but yeah, that's really big. It's hard. It would be difficult to over exaggerate how important it is to use good seat selection and good table selection and good game selection. It is the primary decision. 16 through 18. Stay aware of your advantages and be able to quantify your edges. If you don't know what your edges are, if you don't know, back to the principle of reciprocity, if you don't know what things exactly it is that you're doing better than your opponents, you may not even have an edge. Going to the flop in Hold'em, you can really only have one of 3 edges working for you. You can have a positional advantage, you can be starting with the best hand, or you can be better than your opponent is after the flop. If you are consistently finding yourself in situations where you're playing out of position against a stronger range, and you're making more mistakes than your opponent or opponents, you're not doing it right. Stay aware of your edges, and if you don't have them, quit. Be able to quantify them. If I'm coaching you and I ask you, why are you at this table? Have an answer for me. You know, like, because the guy in the 6th seat is really bad at doing this, or I just watched the guy to my immediate right lose his entire stack with pocket jacks on a king-high board that ran out as a 3 flush, and I thought it might be a nice place to sit in because I know that I'm better at folding than these guys are, and I've got an edge there. So be able to quantify and understand where the money comes from, and if you don't know where your edge is, really throw it into question and be honest with yourself as to whether you have an edge or if you should look for another table. 17, I'm not going to get into this too much. You need to understand basic pot odds, guys, really, just like how to convert the pot size and the bet into a pot odds fraction is absolutely primary. I mean, it's a prerequisite to be able to play in this game, and if you don't know how to do it, turn this off and figure it out right this second. I mean, you got to at least understand the very most basic ideas behind pot odds and how often, if you make a bet of this size, does your opponent have to fold in order for your bluff to be immediately profitable. You need to know those things. Number 18, understand that mistakes only come in four kinds. There's only four types of mistakes, and the first two are pretty much unimportant. You can make math mistakes because you don't know the math or you just kind of screwed up. Um, but again, I'm going to urge you to go back to the drawing board on that and figure out what pot odds are. And don't make calling mistakes on based. When you have a draw, it's the easiest thing in the world. Uh, when you have a draw, to figure out whether you are drawing correctly or incorrectly. Don't call incorrectly and then have no backup plan. Just calling purely for pot odds that aren't there. Mm. Likewise, don't call with a bluff catcher when your opponent overbets the pot and you don't think that your opponent is really capable of bluffing more than 10-20% of the time. That's another kind of a math mistake. Misclicks are just pilot errors, like kind of falling asleep at the wheel and just doing something kind of dumb on accident, like, oh, oops, you do something followed by, oh, oops, like you're playing live and you meant to just call, but you put too much money in and you raised, or you meant to raise, but you didn't announce it, so it just counts as a call. You put in a single chip, so those kinds of mistakes, that's not the big thing that we want to focus on right now. The two real types of mistakes you're going to make in this game once you figure out how not to make the little weird mistakes. The first one is hand reading. You can just range your opponent incorrectly. Sometimes your opponent's going to turn over a hand at showdown that you would have never believed in a million years that your opponent would be capable of having at that decision point. So if you're not hand reading well, and you're finding yourself very often very wrong about what kinds of holdings your opponent has when you get to showdown, go back to the drawing board on that and really learn how to do it. The other type of mistake that you can make, and this is another thing I saw a lot, is tonight again I was working with a student, and I was going through a video that he'd made of himself playing, and then I was sweating him. And very often he would make a play where he would be dialed in very well to his opponent's range, but he was expecting that his opponent was going to fold second pair facing a bet on the flop, turn, and river. He said, I think he's got second pair based on this, this, and this. And I'm like, yeah, that makes some sense. Bets the flop, gets called, bets the turn, gets called, bets the river for pot, and gets called again. The guy turns over exactly the hand he put him on, and he gets very frustrated and berates that player, basically saying that he should never have that hand. So it's crazy for you to have this hand. What's wrong with you? You're an idiot. All these types of things. But the truth is that it's your fault when you bluff a calling station, right? It's your fault when you nail your opponent's range completely, but you still manage to lose money in the hand. You really have to get better at figuring out what makes your opponents tick. Analyze them. Don't think about what you would do in a situation. It's irrelevant. Think about what you expect your opponent to do given the range that you put them on. So those are my 18 edicts. Go through them, and if you think that I missed anything, let me know. I don't think I did. I think it's all right here. Get good at these 18 things, think in these terms, and I can pretty well guarantee you that you'll be a winning poker player. Until next time, Navonod. Good quote, Luck, exclamation point, end quote.